You've already mentioned how important copper is to China, but your book is, a tale of rice and copper. What is the significance of rice?
Rice is a major player here. So let me just give you a briefer on Pakistan's agricultural profile. Pakistan has great land. It's quite fertile. However, Pakistan had faced issues exporting its produce because of roads that have been too, I'll say, not very well groomed. China comes in, it fixes its roads, but it also invests in Pakistan's agriculture industry. Now, if you look at the official numbers, such as on the China Investment Tracker by the American Enterprise Institute, you'll find that agriculture remains a very almost negligible part of China's investment in Pakistan. However, the one of the main people behind this database, Derek Scissors, informed me that there are many channels through which China can invest that are not reported, and so the agricultural investment in from China to Pakistan might be way more than the official numbers state. Especially since if you look at the government publications of both states, you will find a discrepancy. Like what is actually going in there? It's quite hard to pinpoint it. But the outcome of this has been that rice exports from Pakistan to China have skyrocketed in recent years. Usually, Pakistan harvests what's called the indica rice, which is the long grain basmati rice, which is a staple of Central Asian cuisine. We also have it in the Middle East. Whereas China consumes the japonica rice, which is the smaller grain and more glutinous, sticky rice. As part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has invested massively into Pakistan's agriculture sector, and it has sent researchers from the actually laboratory of Wuhan to pioneer the planting of high-yielding japonica rice, which China wants to consume. So China has made Pakistan into a new source of its rice import needs. Um, so yes, there are even studies saying that the whole point of the Belt and Road isn't just military and economic; it's also agricultural. Why? Because once you secure a source of raw material, food is a raw material, then you can free up labor to pursue more higher yielding economic processes. Last time I was on, I talked about the difference between core and periphery states. Agriculture is a peripheral process. Farmers aren't particularly rich. The produce isn't particularly expensive unless you're in Canada. Uh, but in general, it's not a very lucrative business. So you want your farmers. I mean, people would rather have a computer scientist than a farmer in a given state. But you need your food, don't you? So China adopted a during the Mao era. It adopted a policy of grain self-sufficiency. It wanted to be over 90% self-sufficient in grains, wheat and rice especially. However, this policy was difficult to enforce because China has very little arable land or land suited for agriculture. And so in 2012, we saw the first instance of China really importing agriculture en masse, especially rice, soybeans as well, of course, wheat, so on and so forth. Where Pakistan comes into this is, as I said, it's now become Pakistan's rice export destinations have fluctuated in the 2010s. Sometimes the top export destination is Kenya, sometimes it's the UK, sometimes it's the UAE, and sometimes it's China. But in the past, I want to say 4 years, China has been on the top of the export list. So Pakistan has kind of been molded to fit China's agriculture import needs. Now, during COVID, China saw what the result would be if it depended too much on imports, and so there's a new policy now to rehash the grain self-sufficiency scheme, with the intention of becoming self-sufficient in grains once again by 2035. This in soybeans, wheat, and rice. The United States Department of Agriculture underestimates and doesn't really think that China is able to achieve this. China is assertive in that it can achieve wheat and soybean self sufficiency. However, the one thing that both sources agree to is that China will need to ramp up its imports to meet growing demand. Despite Chinese diets becoming more westernized with the consumption of like beef and dairy and pasta and so on, Chinese industry requires rice, especially in the creation of, for example, rice wine vinegar, glass noodles, feed for cattle feed, as well as the use in industry, because as you know, rice can become ethanol and so on and so forth. So the demand for rice is increasing. Therefore, China's need for sources of rice is increasing. And its arable land is not going to increase anytime soon, despite its best efforts. In fact, the yield of China's land risks decreasing because of pollution there and previously dirty ways of using the land. Um, so if you look at China's main import sources of rice, these have been Vietnam, Thailand, Pakistan throughout the last decade. Pakistan eventually rises to meet a very important, a very significant percentage of China's rice import needs. Vietnam and Thailand were once high. Now China kind of sources equally out of each of them. So it's achieved a way to no longer be too dependent on one state for its rice. Now it can kind of pick and choose between Pakistan, Vietnam, Thailand. Cambodia is also having this done to it. I argue in another forthcoming article of mine. And actually, it imported from India during COVID as well. So rice is a huge part, I think, of the China-Pakistan economic corridor and of the BRI in general.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. Like the part about how, a laboratory in Wuhan is doing genetic experiments on rice and then sending it abroad, having the sort of Pakistan be the test ground for that. And then, of course, Pakistan now becomes dependent on China to buy the rice because it's the kind of rice that China wants, not the kind of rice that Pakistan's other neighbors want.
So is this sustainable for Pakistan in terms of like, do they have the capacity to produce the rice exports for China and produce enough rice for internal consumption, other needs?
Well, the farmers are thrilled about this. Previously they tried to export to China. However, they relied too heavily on Japanese technology to sort out the rice. Japan has very advanced, very capable rice sorting machines. However, these rendered the price of rice too high at the point of export to be any competition to Vietnam and Thailand. China comes in and offers and sells Pakistan cheaper rice sorting machines, which encourages farmers to plant more rice. So this has been good for the farmers of Pakistan. China has also given them not subsidies but tariff exclusion. It's given them preferential treatment for tariff exclusion to encourage them to plant more rice. Certainly, if China wants to punish Pakistan now, it will stop importing Pakistan's growing supply of Japonica rice, and the only other markets for that would be Laos, Japan, and other countries that prefer the sticky rice. But it would certainly put Pakistan in a bind. So China, in this way, is creating an asymmetry. It's creating an asymmetry between the two states. It keeps enforcing its position of, okay, you need me, I don't need you as much. As I said before, Thailand and Vietnam were like up here in terms of China's import sources. Now they're down here, and Pakistan went from there to here as well. So now China depends kind of equally on each of them to the point where it can like disregard one of them in case relations sour, which may be the case with Thailand and Vietnam, especially if China keeps pushing its South China Sea narrative. In terms of the experimentation of Wuhan and exporting that, it's actually it sounds sinister, but it's very common for all nations to embark on agricultural experiments to produce the highest grain, the highest yielding seeds possible. In terms of sustainability on this, I have another article coming out that shows how rice farming has impacted the environment in both Pakistan and Cambodia. Rice farming, as you know, involves water paddies. Water paddies are a source of methane production. Methane is many, many times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So that would, in theory, would degrade the environmental profile of the countries producing this rice. In Pakistan and the Cambodia, the methane intensity, which means the amount of methane produced per dollar, has been impacted after agricultural investments from China.
What's interesting about that is it's kind of this trade is extractive in the way that, like, China is extracting the rice, extracting the copper from Pakistan, and at the same time it's able to almost like export the pollution burden onto
Yeah,
another country, right? Like they don't have to, if they get called out for greenhouse gas emissions or whatever, or the type of pollution that comes from copper mining, it's not affecting China. It's affecting these other countries that are producing for China.
absolutely, absolutely. Even in 2010, official Chinese newspapers criticized the government for allowing the continued dirty extraction of minerals such as copper and aluminum. So when China is able to invest in external pits, it kind of outsources the extraction of copper, which is dirtier than what happens in the furnaces, what happens in smelting. So if you look at China and Pakistan's copper production profiles, Pakistan has grown in the production of, or the extraction of, raw copper. China has grown in the smelting of copper. Smelting is a more advanced process that is less polluting, that is more high yielding. So in this way, China kind of advances as a state, whereas Pakistan's kind of indentured as a state. And this just kind of feeds into their unequal relationship, which I think is very parallel to a core periphery or a hegemon periphery relationship.